Greetings. Welcome to Revere TV's presentation of Unbeaten, the story of the 1964 Revere High School football team. My name is Bob Marra, and I'm joined by Brandon Brito, the creator and producer of Unbeaten, and Victor Mancini, Revere High School class of 1965, who you'll see often as number 40, one of the stars of that 1964 team. Brandon, Victor, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Many of you watching may have already seen Unbeaten, which was released on YouTube in December. But tonight, we have the privilege to talk with the person whose imagination and talent made the film a reality. We will explore some of Brandon Brito's insights and inspiration about his idea and his work. Victor Mancini still has contact with many of his former teammates from 60 years ago and was invaluable in helping Brandon connect the personalities whose recollections and reflections about the team are a dominant theme of the film. Unbeaten is a story not just about football, but of commitment, achievement, and the occasions in life that don't go our way, but hopefully shape character and self-respect. The events occurred at a time when high school football was an integral part of the Revere community. As the film points out at its very start, Revere reflects a bygone era of community pride, a true statement now and even more so back in the 1960s. The high school football games were a rallying point, a bond within the community of many first and second generation Americans. Unbeaten captures the events and the emotions that flowed with every victory and the harsh reality of a ruling that erased those victories. Brandon Brito is a 2016 graduate of Revere High School, where he was captain of the football team. He went on to Boston College, where he graduated in 2020 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Film Studies. At BC, Brandon was awarded the Screenwriting Award for Excellence in Screenwriting by the school's Art History, and Film Department. Let's start with a basic point. Brandon, the events of your film Unbeaten happened 50 years before you played football at Revere High. I'm not even sure your parents were born at the time. What inspired you to produce a film about a relatively obscure event of local history?
Yeah, you're correct in saying that my parents definitely were not born at the time. They weren't born until 4 years later, my father, 5 years later, my mother. But the reason why I decided to make this film is for the sake of the community. Not only that, but also to tell the stories that took place here. There's a lot that the Revere youth doesn't know about their own city that they grew up in. A lot of our football players don't really know the history behind their team. And that can be said about the same, all other sports. Basketball, soccer, track. There's a history everywhere we go. And Revere has such a profound history that I think we need to preserve. And that just kind of, when I found out about the actual story, I just immediately knew this had to be told because of how amazing it was.
Victor, you played on that team in 1964. You graduated in 65 the following spring. In between the 60 years of when you played and the release of Unbeaten, were there any times where you would talk about this season, or is it something that you lived through it and it was in the past and then came back, or was it a constant theme of your own life?
Both.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing that people would ask me, how did it feel to be undefeated? And I'd say, obviously you didn't follow the whole story. We weren't undefeated. In our minds we were, but that was taken away by a technicality. And they'd say, what? And I said, it's a long story. And that's how I would basically leave it. So
about 90 minutes long.
Yeah, and thank God we did leave it in the past. The players amongst ourselves, we lived it. We lived it, but we didn't share it with people. It was something that we know what we did. We know how we did it. Mm-hmm. We're proud of it, and we would take it to our grave. He dug it up.
He certainly did.
He really did.
And speaking of technicalities, Brandon, you named the film Unbeaten, and there's a little story behind that. What is it?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I named it Unbeaten is going back to what Victor said about the technicality. You know, at the end of the day, it was a technicality that made them forfeit all of their games leading up to Thanksgiving. But there were also other reasons as well. You know, the second reason being they won. It's up to Thanksgiving. They were 7-0-1. So 7 wins, 0 losses, 1 tie against Malden Catholic, tied 6-6.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, that doesn't count as a victory or a defeat. It's a draw. You know. But other than that, I think the most important thing to talk about is, you know, it can be argued from people outside of the city or people that oppose that team and that story. You know, well, you know, technically that's a defeat. Technically you lost to this team, this team, this team, this team because of that technicality. And they can make ridiculous arguments about that, you know, but at the end of the day, for the players that played on that team 60 years ago, they know and their opponents know when it came to playing 4 quarters of football, no team was able to beat them.
Right, and
they could not beat that Revere team.
And Victor, one of your teammates, Bill Santolo, alludes to that in the film, where he tells the story of one of his partners,
so amazing,
who played out at I think at Quincy, I think he said, and he says, you know, you weren't, you know, we beat you, and Bill, being a lawyer, corrected him
technically
in no uncertain terms of what they might have done, but they didn't beat them on the football field.
44-14, something like that.
At the time, that was North Quincy. That was, and at the time, that was the most points scored by a Revere High football team, and that record stood, I think, until like 2019, when Revere had that very good season a couple of years ago. That record stood for quite a few years of 44 points in a game.
We could have scored a lot more, seriously, but we did. Charlie kept us under control.
Brandon, when you learned the story and decided that you were going to do a film about it, what was your thought process? What did you think you needed to do to put this together?
So this kind of goes back to when I first heard about the story in general. And it started just before the pandemic. It was, if I could be very precise about it, it was around 2019, my junior year in college. And I was taking a documentary film class, and I was, obviously as a final project, you have to create a short documentary. And I decided to make a documentary on off-season training from my former football team, you know, so Coach Chick allowed me to film the players training and, you know, allowed me to interview them. So that was a great experience. But while I was doing that,
and
I was
just
doing my own
to interrupt for a second, when you say Coach Chick, for those who aren't locals,
Lou Ciccatelli.
Lou Revere High football coach Lou Ciccatelli.
Great man.
Opened the door for you to film
Absolutely.
that. Now, you had done a film earlier than that regarding soccer in Cape Verde.
Yeah, so that was in 2020. That was just before, well, after the pandemic, or during the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
So I filmed in Cape Verde. I shot the film in Cape Verde my senior year, and this was supposed to be my senior project. And that film released on May 15th. That was 2020, in the middle of quarantine.
So your first documentary was about the off-season training.
Yeah, it was a short documentary. It's not available now. It's, you know, it's kind of in my private videos right now.
Well, it'll find its way into.
I think it'll come back out. Yeah.
When did you actually learn about the '64 team? How did that come up?
So that goes back to when I was researching for. It was called "There's No Off Season." So when I was doing that short film, I was doing a whole lot of research on, you know, Revere football, things like that, just to include in the storyline. And I came across this article in the Journal. It was talking about Revere's golden age of sports, and I came to find out that Alex Michella, who's in the documentary, was the one that wrote that. And he talked about, you know, the Beach City Boys and, you know, the Fearsome Fivesome, which he was a part of as a center. And, you know, all these amazing stories that people I just did not know about. So I'm reading about all of this, and I'm like, wow, this is awesome, you know, that they had these glorious days, you know. And I remember I looked into the comments, and somebody commented Why no mention of the 1964 team, when boys became men in the locker room, when Coach Silvio Cella came in and had to tell us that we, after going undefeated the entire season, had to forfeit all of our games because of a technicality. And, you know, we had to go, when we decided as a team to go back out there and prove once again that we were unbeaten and that we were deserving of the Class B championship. I'm reading all of this, and I'm just like,
Let me interrupt
wow.
you there and put this into some different type of context. Victor, what do you remember about that?
Shock and awe, mostly shock. And then it was unbelievable. We just didn't know how to comprehend this big vacuum that was just taken from this elation that we were going through leading into the game.
It comes up in the film. I'm pretty sure it's John Delgazo who says, we didn't know a thing about it. And then all of a sudden, and that's how it happened.
And I'll be honest with you, when it happened, I kept saying, it's not real. There's something wrong. And again, he coming up with technicalities that someone made a mistake. And I had heard another story that I'm not going to relay to you live on TV as to who might have been the culprit behind it, okay?
I remember it as a 9-year-old kid that idolized the high school football team, and I'd go to all the games.
You were our favorite fan.
And,
You really were. You really
and
were.
I still am.
Yeah.
But I remember it, and I can remember my dad talking about, you know, they're going to have to forfeit. Oh, forfeit? What in the world is forfeit? What does that mean, forfeit? And as it turns out, that year, you got the Winthrop game coming up, and lo and behold, Winthrop is undefeated too.
It's amazing. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing turn of events that fostered the birth of this documentary. And thank you. That's all I can say is thank you very much.
thank you guys.
Yeah. Brandon, tell us a little bit about the legwork. Now you get this idea, and you start to, you know, foster this thought of what I'm going to do. But it's not like you could just jump onto the internet and download films off of YouTube or something like that. This is, I don't want to say ancient history, but it's from a time.
It's an antique.
It's definitely an antique because it's from a time where there wasn't as much production of the types of things we do today. Today, years from now, there'll be bazillion resources of film and photographs and everything else. But you now had to really do a research project. What were some of the steps you had to do? Like, how did you go about it?
So the first step was, obviously, you have to gather some more information. And, you know, when I first read about it in the journal, I kept the story in my back pocket. I'm like, all right, let's graduate college and let's run with this idea. And it was one of the ideas in like a list of just over 50 ideas of just different like films and things. And I was like, I'm gonna focus on this one. You know, this is home. It's a story from home, you know. And I just came across, you know, doing some research online. I couldn't really find much online, but, you know, going to the bookstore and finding these books on, you know, Revere and Revere history, I came across a picture of the team. I was like, this motley looking crew is the 1964 Revere High football
40.
team.
I remember that.
Was
We were
unbeaten.
all motley, yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at it, I was like, that's the team. That's the team that was in that comment, who it was written by Stephen Marullo. We'll get to that in just a second, how I found that out. But, you know, I took a picture of the team. They were wearing their white jerseys, just white on white, and they're just like, they're just grilling you, like, you know,
And
mean mug.
that's the photograph that you use as the
and that's the-
tagline
yep,
of
that's the
of
photo.
the Unbeaten film.
And,
now that team had some impressive football players, including there've been only a very small handful of football players from Revere who went on to play in the National Football League, and to my knowledge, the most recent and last one was Jim Delgazo, your quarterback.
All-American, yeah.
So, but other players on that team, we mentioned John Delgazo, Jim's twin brother. Billy Santola was a running back. You were a flanker. And there were some other prominent players on that
kid,
team.
Paul Newell.
Paul Newell.
He was kind of prominent.
He
on
was
that
pretty
team.
good.
Yeah.
But Steve Marullo, Paul Newell, Alan Drover, Phil
Stacio.
Alexander, Jack Stacio. I mean, these were real exceptional athletes that just all came together that year. You take it, you know, every year there's maybe a player or two that is a standout on a team, but that team had one standout after another. What do you remember about some of those? What do you remember about some of the characters on the team? Because there were characters.
They're definitely characters. And to give you an idea, you brought him up twice already. Steve Marullo.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Marullo was an all-around athlete.
Yeah.
Great hockey player, great baseball player, tough as nails. Probably the toughest pound-for-pound competitor that you'd ever want to meet. I mean, he didn't want to lose. He was a winner.
Yeah.
And I think when you go down the lineup of the team, you found people that had either never played.
Mm-hmm.
Vinny Sansaruso came from Italy. He could barely speak English.
Yeah.
But Steve Bloom got a hold of him. The team from before, the year before, the Fearsome Fivesome,
Yeah.
they taught them a lesson. And guys toughened up, and they learned technique from the coaches. And that's one thing I wanted to say, that I don't think any of the players really addressed it as well as they should have. It was a team of character, fostered by the fathers meaning the coaches.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They were like fathers, they were like brothers, they were so inspiring.
Yep.
They taught you how to, you know, be a man, how to take your lumps and give them back, and to this day.
And that coaching staff, head coach Silvio Cella, his assistants were Justin Capitalupo, Ed Manganello,
Mm-hmm.
Archie Malace.
Archie Malace, and there was there, am I missing someone? I thought there was one more. Or it might have just been those four. I hope I'm not missing.
Those were the four primary,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
Bernie Sockett.
Well, Bernie.
No one mentioned Bernie. Got to mention Bernie
Bernie
Sockett.
made sure you had a uniform to
Yeah.
wear and everything
Put the
that went
towels
along
in the
with
mouths.
it. Yeah, that's right. That Brendan, unfortunately, you missed out on that, and there's probably no film of dropping off, bringing the dirty uniforms from the locker room downstairs upstairs to the big bin,
Yeah.
where you dumped it in, and Bernie took care of it from
not
there.
the over here in the barrel.
Yeah, it was a crazy time. Getting back to what you had to do, so
Yeah.
now you start digging into things, and you're coming up with what? Images, photographs. How do you get them? Where do they come from?
So, going into October 2020, I ended up visiting the Revere Historical Society Cultural Preservation on Beach Street.
Yep.
So I went into the museum. Bob Upton was nice enough to give me a tour. You know, I'm looking around and I'm checking out the athletic section, the sports section, and we talked a little bit more about the team. And you know, he was kind of the first guy that I got on board to make this film. It wasn't until 2022, though, a couple of years later, where we actually started pre-production, started calling people. One of the first people that me and Bob reached out to, I believe it was Mike Waino. And Mike Waino was an offensive lineman. He was a part of that 64 team.
Yep.
And, you know, I talked on the phone with him in the parking lot at my job at the YMCA. And, you know, after a shift, and, you know, I'm talking to him a little bit about this and, you know, my ideas for this. And he said, yeah, I'm going to reach out to people. And before you know it, I'm on the phone with Victor Mancini. And, you know, he's telling me a little bit about, you know, what Victor has accomplished as a producer, and, you know, how much he's well aware of, like, film, and, you know, how passionate he is about his 64 team. He was a senior on the team, and I remember speaking to him about it, and, you know, he was on board, and he got Paul Newell on board, and I had about a 2.5 hour conversation with Paul the first time I spoke with him. You know, he was very adamant of knowing, okay, who is this guy making this film?
Sure.
You know, it's like, how did you find out about this, you know?
Yeah.
And we just got into a whole conversation just about, you know, growing up in Revere, and, you know, I've learned from all the guys, from Jim, from Victor, from Paul, from Steve, from John, from all the guys that I've interviewed, from Coach Cella, from Gina Cella. It's really like, sure, things change about the city, but I feel like a lot of things just stay the same. And I feel like along with so many other young kids growing up can relate to so many of the stories and the things that they say in the film.
Now, Victor, when Brandon first contacted you, had like up to that time, were you still in regular contact with Paul and some of the other players?
All of them.
Yeah.
But to more or less see them once a year. You know,
And just as friends. It wasn't like you had team reunions or something like that.
We all had our own lives. Everybody moved to a different direction. I mean, Paul was out in the West Coast.
Yep.
I'm up in New Hampshire now. We're on the border. And so, no, we didn't really communicate, but when we saw each other, it was like love. It was always a respect.
Sure. In the film Unbeaten, there's a tremendous amount of game film as you take the viewer through the season from the opening game. I think it was at Stoughton. Playing, ultimately to the Thanksgiving Day game. Where did all that come from? How did you dig that up?
It was a critical part of the film, and I remember telling myself, well, if this is going to happen, I really hope that we have film that's still around. So the first thing that I did was, I'm an assistant coach at Revere High School, coaching football along with Coach Lou Ciccatelli and all of my teammates, and I asked him, like, hey, do you mind if I check and see if there's any film available and things like that? And he told me, like, yeah, there's a area in the closet in the field house that has plenty of those. I'll open it for you. You can go and check. So I look and I check, and just as I hoped, it was all there, labeled 1964. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, and obviously these reels are like first half, second half, and Silvio's cello name signed on it.
This is not a stick drive
no.
that you just stick into a computer.
No,
tell us like some of the technology that you dealt with.
16 millimeter film.
Yeah.
So the real deal. It's the reason why filming things is called filming things now.
And,
it's actual film.
Did you have to get hold of a 16 millimeter projector to
no.
see what you're looking at?
Luckily, there are great outlets for us to digitize and convert any kind of film or media into a digital format. So what I did was I did my research and I reached out to the best of the best locally, and it's Ever-Present. There's a company called Ever-Present that has a branch out in Newton, and I brought the film to them and I asked them, could we convert this? They said, absolutely. So bring me what you need, and we got 8 out of the 9 games converted.
You just anticipated my question.
Yeah.
So you've got 9 games, and of course the 9th game is such a pivotal game, and it's such a historic game for so many reasons, but that's the one that's missing. And you start looking for that. And from what I understand, you had pretty much a posse out looking for that film, and really couldn't find it. Tell us a little bit about the background of finding, and the game I'm referring to, of course, is the Thanksgiving Day game against Winthrop.
I mean, I've never really led a manhunt except for when I was a kid playing manhunt. But, this came pretty close to it. I mean, so to correct myself, there was actually 7 film reels or 7 games that we actually converted, because the only one that we couldn't get our hands on, well, the 2 that we couldn't get our hands on, were the Lynn Classical game and the Winthrop game. The Lynn Classical game was for a completely different reason, and that was because the actual film was destroyed. As you see in the film, the game, it rained heavily during the game, and from what I'm hearing, it damaged the film to the point where it's like you couldn't even rewatch it.
Yeah.
So that film wasn't in the vault, so my assumption was, it probably was no good. But the Winthrop film, I kept being told, it's out there, it's out there, it's out there. So.
And let me just back you up for a second. For those who might be unfamiliar with it, back in the day, every game was filmed with a 16 millimeter movie camera, and the teams would swap films. This was the scouting, and they still do it today, although it's a lot easier probably to send an email link. But
now it's called Spygate.
But way ahead of their time. But the schools would film the game, one camera up high on the press box, and it would just film the game. And then the teams would swap those each week to
make
scout
it more
the other
difficult
team
for the following week.
Right. So you come up with all but the Lynn Classical game, and the Lynn Classical game was an interesting game part of the season, but it wasn't as historic and as pivotal to your story as the Winthrop game. So now what happens as you're kind of trying to find that Winthrop film?
So the first instance where, I found out that the film was found, it was Stephen Adamson Jr., the son of Stephen Tank Adamson, who was the star halfback in Winthrop, who ended up playing for the University of Wyoming.
Yep. And just once again, a little bit of background. Winthrop had its own collection of star football players,
they did.
Yep.
The Olsen brothers.
and one of the real stars on that team was Stephen Adamson, who has since passed away. But you connected with his son, correct?
Yes, I connected with his son in July of last year, 2024, and I was actually playing some basketball. I was shooting some hoops, and I ended up getting in contact with him, and I was like, I'm going to call him right now. And we had a really good conversation. I asked him questions about his father, and what he did after playing for Winthrop, and he told me that he had like a whole highlight reel of his father, and the games that he played in, and we ended up converting it, and you can see a lot of the games that he played in. There's some segments in the film where you can see his some of his best plays when we're talking about Winthrop leading up to the Thanksgiving game. They're a phenomenal team.
Yeah.
It wasn't until September or October of
Let me interrupt you
where
for
we
a
ended up
second.
finding it.
You're in July. This film's coming along.
Yep.
And you don't have the Thanksgiving Day film, even though you hear it's out there somewhere, but
Yeah.
hearing that it's out there and having it are two different things.
Yeah.
What would you have done if it didn't turn out?
So I was going to use the footage that was in Mr. Adamson's reel.
Okay.
The Thanksgiving game was there.
Yeah.
It was in it, but it wasn't as clear. And the reason for that was the film, we had it digitized and it was sent over to me, thanks to Mr. Adamson. But the film was digitized, but before it was digitized and sent to me, I could tell it was on a VHS.
Yeah.
And VHS, it tends to lessen, downgrades the quality of the film. So you can see the players, you can see movement, you can see the touchdown at the end of the game, but it's not as clear as everything else. So it was going to be, it was going to throw off the audience a little.
And
so I was like, I'm going to leave this on the timeline, and it's like, just in case. I mean, I think it works anyway. That's fine.
And then you get the miracle discovery, and this is where we circle back to one Steve Marullo.
Think about
Yeah.
So tell us, because that's a great story. How did that come about?
So this was after after we shot the celebration.
There was the
on
opening,
field, the
right?
opening, the
And again,
opening
just
night
to
celebration.
give it a little bit of reference, there was a ceremony that took place before Revere's first football game of this past 2024 season.
Yeah.
And a lot of the players who played in 1964 came to Revere, whether some of them traveled quite a distance to be here. And there was a ceremony before the game. The players were recognized. There was representatives from the MIAA, and there's now a banner that hangs in the field house at Revere High commemorating the 1964 team. So that happens in September, and you meet Stephen Marullo that day.
Yeah.
And what happens from there?
So we, at the end of the game, Mr. Marullo came up to me. He walked on the field and shook my hand. Hi, I'm Stephen Marullo. I was like, yeah, I know who you are. You were the guard on the team. You're Stephen Marullo. It's a pleasure to meet you. He was telling me, I'm living in Baltimore now, but I'd really like to talk to you a little bit more about the team. There's just so much that I can share. We couldn't talk that much that night because I had to go with the team back to the locker room. But we traded contact information, and in October we spoke. We spoke to each other a little bit about potentially having him be interviewed for the film. He had a lot to say, and I loved what he had to say. And at this point, the film is pretty much, it's on the timeline. Everything is put in place, and I was just kind of intrigued by what he said and everything that he had to say. And I was like, Steven, do you want to be a part of this? He said, absolutely. So I sat him down, and we had the interview.
And you went to Baltimore for the interview?
No, he offered to come up to Boston.
Okay.
He said he was visiting a friend.
I see. Okay.
On a certain weekend. So I was like, great, I'll come and see you then. So I went over to Eastern Ave and had a good conversation with him. And he calls me, I think, a few weeks later after the interview, and he tells me, Brandon, I'm not sure if you need this or anything, but I found these reels in my closet. I was doing some cleanup, and I found these 2 reels in my closet. I was like, really? And at this point, I was thinking, like, well, what are the odds that this is the Thanksgiving Day film? Probably not. Like, I don't know if this is the actual season.
Really?
I don't know if this is going to be from the season. So I asked him, yeah, what does it say on the cover? He says, Thanksgiving Day, 1964, Revere 8, Winthrop 0. And I was like,
you gotta be kidding.
You gotta be kidding me. We've been looking for that for 2 years. So I told Steven, yeah, could you do me a favor and send those over up here? And at first I was gonna have him send it up here so I can bring it to Ever Present, but I found out Ever Present had a branch in the Baltimore region. So
don't take the chance.
Yeah. So we had like a 3-way call. It was me, it was Stephen Marullo, and it was Ever Present. And we're telling him like, okay, so this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna have it converted here. I'll pay for it. We'll have a drive and a DVD sent to Stephen Marullo. We'll have a drive sent to me for the film. And, it was a whole process.
And it
came in just before Halloween.
And that film, of course, is
crystal clear.
The climax of the story. Victor, in the film, your teammate Billy Santolo talks about. I think it was either Billy or John Delgazo, and it might have been both. Talked about how they came up with the winning play. And now you had made a key play just before the winning play. In fact, for the longest time, I always remembered cheering in the stands, and for some reason I thought you scored.
Everyone in that corner
scored because you just missed.
I needed to get the first down. I needed to get out of bounds. I knew that Jimmy Delgazo put it right where it had to be, and no one else could get it but me. And we went out of bounds, and that was it.
But now, John and Billy Santolo, John Delgazo and Billy Santolo talk about the sandlot nature of the winning touchdown.
It was actually written in the dirt.
That's true.
Jimmy went, okay, we're gonna they're packing in, blocking, cut back blocking. Billy, you're gonna go for. I mean, it was just like you would as a kid.
Yeah. And when you for those of you who watch the film, and it's such a thrilling moment because you hear Billy talking about it now 60 years later, and then you see it, but when you see that play, how it was designed, he starts to go as if he's going to go around the end, and then cuts in off right tackle, and just gets into the end zone.
We all collapsed. Today they would call those cutback blocks.
Right, there'd be a 15-yard penalty. There'd be unsportsmanlike conduct.
What it looked like to me, from a coach's perspective, it looked like a toss crack.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have a wing back or somebody in the slot. Send him in motion. He'll cut back on that, crack back on that defensive end or whoever was, rushing the edge. And it was a perfect block. And Billy had plenty of room to work. Well, not too much room to work because Winthrop, they attacked immediately.
He had to get in.
That's how good that Winthrop team was. They read it, even if it wasn't in the playbook.
It was. Well, they had seen us from other films. What we did in that area, and that wasn't what we did.
You didn't have that.
What we did was straight. We powered at you. We just went right at you. But we knew we couldn't do that.
Let's talk a little bit about the emotion of the story. You've heard, I know, from a lot of people who have seen the film Unbeaten, and some of these are not football fans. They might have some passing interest, but what they took from the film and what interested them. Talk a little bit about that, about the human nature, the human nature aspect of Unbeaten.
So, football, and I think every football player who's ever put on a helmet will agree with me. You know, football is not just a sport. You know, it's a microcosm for life, for what you've gone through, and what you're going through, and what you will go through. You know, it's not about trying to avoid certain obstacles sometimes. It's about what are you going to do when it hits the fan and when things happen. You know, are you going to lay down, give up, or are you going to continue to keep punching, keep fighting? And that's, you know, it sounds a bit corny to some people, but, you know, it's said over and over and over again because it's true.
Victor, when this happened in 1964, so there's a bunch of high school kids thinking you're getting ready for a big game on Thanksgiving Day, which is a big game anyway. This one even more so because you're both undefeated. And all of a sudden, you're not playing for a championship. The newspapers are covered with stories talking about how Revere had to forfeit their games. What Brandon's referring to of that resiliency, that determination, but that's easy for adults to now talk about. Well, football is a microcosm of life, but we're looking back on it from a different perspective, an adult's perspective. What were the kids' perspectives?
We weren't kids any longer.
Interesting.
We grew up.
And was
on that day.
Was there at all a sense of the heck with it?
No.
It was.
No. You're not going to beat us. You're not. That was a commitment.
Yeah.
In the huddle, I just came from the emergency room, so in the huddle.
So you're not choking up because of the emotion of the story?
Both. We knew who we were. And to have someone come in and take it away.
Yeah.
And that's Revere. It's not going to happen.
And that's really what happened here. To summarize, because this is all what the story is about, but we're talking about it. To summarize, this was a team that was unbeaten through 8 games. There was an investigation into the possibility of a player, Paul Newell, who was not eligible to play his senior year. To whatever extent they investigated it, they determined that he was an ineligible player and forced Revere to forfeit their games. And once again, we're talking about technicalities. His technicality was that he wasn't absent enough days in a row to qualify to play that extra year. He was absent enough days because he had repeated a sophomore year, missed some. Was it 41 or 43 days?
You had to miss.
You had to miss 25 in a row.
Yeah, something like that.
And he had missed more than 25, but 5 here, 6 there, 4 here. Had never missed 25 in a row. He had mononucleosis, and had never missed 25 days in a row, and that robbed him of that did not make him ineligible his repeat year. And that's what came back and bit you.
Well, in the end, it worked out because we went unbeaten.
That's right. Victor, in the film, Paul, in a really emotional scene, takes blame for it, accepts blame for it. How did you feel as a teammate of his
He's not only
to
a
see
teammate,
him?
He's like my best friend. And he's carried that sack on his back.
Yeah.
And it all of a sudden came off.
And
when we won, he was elated.
And there was never a sense on the team of resentment
Not
to
at
Paul.
all. Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. It was like, let's do it for him. Let's do it for one of the brothers, And to this day, it was the same thing.
Yeah.
So he was just trying to pay us back in the film, like.
Yeah, it was a pretty magnanimous moment for him to take that on because I don't think anybody ever really blamed him for it.
No.
And
we were just shocked.
Yeah.
As was he. When it came down, he was like, "Oh my God!" But he didn't even share that. He just went into a coma He just was like, what did I do?
Yeah.
What have I done?
Yeah.
And we didn't feel that way at all.
Right, right. The Brandon, as you met the guys from that team, and obviously a lot of it is in the film, but are there little behind-the-scenes tidbits, like such as Steve Marullo finding the film in his closet, that might be of interest to the viewer?
Well, there was a lot of, sticking to Stephen Marullo, there was a very coincidental, revelation to me that about, Victor, you talked about that was the day you guys were not kids anymore, and you guys were men, and you guys grew up, on that field that day. And Stephen Marullo, he says it in the film, and he said it multiple times during our interview. A lot of it which was left out, but he continued to say, boys became men that day. Boys became men that day. And it just kept sounding so familiar to me. It's like, boys became men, boys became men. And it's like, I go back to that comment that I read that started this entire process. Why no mention of the 1964 team when boys became men on the field? And then I asked him, Stephen, I remember reading a comment in the Revere Journal that talked about Revere's golden age of sports, and a comment talked about why no mention of the '64 team when boys became men. I asked him, do you know who made that comment? He said, I wrote that comment. So I think that was it was just a revelation. It's like, really, if Stephen never really commented that, there's a good chance I wouldn't even know who this team is.
Yeah.
Victor,
how was it broken to the team? How was the news delivered to the team?
Honestly, I can't remember.
Okay.
I'm being honest. I was just like in a daze when the coach came in and just said, we have a revelation to share with you.
Wow.
Something to that effect.
Yep.
And so I looked up, and it was like, because we didn't know what we were being called down for. We knew there was something.
Yeah.
And then when the announcement came, the press release came first, and it was up in the air. No one really knew what it was going to end up as. But when the edict came from MIAA or MIAA, whatever it is.
Back then, it was called the Massachusetts Secondary Schools Principals Association, I think.
And I could tell you what I really feel. I told you that earlier.
Yeah.
Because I've heard it from other sources that that's not the whole story. What you're hearing is not the whole story.
Right.
And I'll leave it at that.
That's a different.
That's another movie.
That's a different movie. That's a mystery. That's
Revere politics.
The current organizer of high school sports in Massachusetts is the MIAA, and the MIAA actually sent a representative one of the assistant executive directors, Steve Dubzinski, came to the Revere Whittier game back in September and spoke on behalf of the MIAA and congratulated the players
he was
from
great.
that. And he made an interesting comment in preparing for his visit to Revere. He looked up to see what was the #1 hit song in the fall of 1964, and lo and behold, it was "Leaders of the Pack." And as he said then, you guys were all leaders of the pack. But the MIAA rules today would not have had the same result that happened in 1964.
What would have happened?
Paul would have been eligible because of the illness and his medical disability to play. He was, and that was the mistake that Revere people made, is that he had been ruled out medically by Revere's school department, that he could not play. This wasn't that he just decided he didn't feel like playing. He could not play. And that's why by the time he was a senior, there was the belief that, well, no, he was declared medically ineligible to play, so he is still eligible. What they overlooked was the year that he was sick, he did not have that 25 consecutive days of being absent. And that's what the headmasters hung their hats on, and that was the
Decision.
That was the decision.
I had heard as a kid that there was a signed waiver. There was supposed to be waivers, papers submitting
Yep.
eligibility requirements every year, and they weren't passed along because we had 3 coaching changes. And somewhere along the line, that documentation was never brought forth.
Right, right,
And that's what happened.
right. And that's where the headmasters had not been notified.
Of that.
And then it was speculative of whether they would have granted a waiver or not had everything gone through. But it's a tragic story. But you know, if it didn't happen that way, maybe this film is not as interesting. High school teams go undefeated. You know, high school
day
teams
long.
go through and they win championships, and it happens all the time. Every year, we're about to enter the winter playoff season. Every year there are champions declared. Because of what happened, that's what makes this story very unique and far more interesting. As I said, there are a lot of people who aren't football fans, have no interest in football, but found this story to be really compelling.
It's true life.
It's a life story.
It's a life story. It really is.
Brandon, what are your plans from this point on with this film? People can see it on YouTube. What can you tell us, or is there something to tell?
Yeah. So originally, I was supposed to have the film up for a limited time, but you know, people really love the film right now. So I've been keeping it up, and it's on my YouTube channel. But what I will be doing is I'm going to be going into film festivals, submitting the movie into film festivals. You know, I've been spreading the word about it, and you know, it's a Revere story, but I also want to show the world, you know, Massachusetts, you know, anybody outside of Revere, stories that are told here and that can be told here, you know, and in the future I would like to see, you know, more expression of the arts, expression through the arts of the culture and the community that we have in this city. You know, I believe in Revere, and I think everybody that is involved in the city of Revere believes in Revere. And I think, you know, telling our stories such as this are important, not only for our historical preservation, but to motivate and uplift each other, because that's what good communities do.
That's a really noble statement, and coming from a relative youngster, it's really rewarding to hear that as an older resident of Revere, to hear someone in your age bracket to talk that way. Victor, I think you and I would agree that if you were going to pick one city and you were just going to make films about life in every respect, Revere would be the place to do it.
I have to share with you, on my way here, I picked up Roland Marullo's book.
Which one? Revere Beach Boulevard?
No, the first one, the one, In Those Days.
Oh, In Those Days.
In Those
Yeah,
Days.
yeah.
And I started reading it last night.
Yeah.
No, I told you I was sick. I went through like 300 pages last night,
Yeah.
and I fell asleep with the book. It's so real. It's so ethnic. It's so much a part of every person.
And Roland, of course, is
Stephen's
Marullo's cousin.
And it's ironic that, you know, it's a prominent name in the family, in the city, and you've chronicled a major event in the city, sports-wise, that otherwise would have just been the motley crew.
Did you have any expectation that you'd get the response that you did? Like, how have you responded to the response?
So when I think for anybody who's ever released a project, started a project, once you hit submit, or once you hit upload, and the film is uploading, or once you begin rolling the film, and you have an audience ready to see this, there's an anxious feeling that's very similar to that minutes before kickoff. You know, I as a player have felt that many times, and I as a coach still feel it. You know, it's a little different, but you know, you feel it. And I think those are those moments that, you know, I embrace those moments. You know, of course I'm gonna be nervous. Is this film going to live up to what the guys have told me? Is this going to be something that the community is going to enjoy? Is the story good enough? Are the lessons that as prevalent to others as they were to me? You know, do people connect with this in a certain way? Even people who haven't been a part of it. That's what I want. This is more than just a football story, you know? This is a story about life. It's a story about how life can be for a lot of us, you know? But it's about how we respond, and, you know, it's whether or not we choose to be winners and prove to the world that we're winners. I, as a Revere person, even going into Boston College, where there were so many people that did not think that I or my younger brother belonged in a university like Boston College because you're from Revere. You know, that lights a fire under you. And Victor will understand that. You will understand that. My goal is I want everybody, by watching this film, to understand that, like, the grit and the integrity that we all should have as members of this community. I was very nervous of the, you know, is this film going to capture that good enough? But from what I've seen by the response, is, you know, people have really enjoyed it. And, you know, it's been nostalgic for so many people, reminiscent for so many people. I've loved reading the comments and seeing what people have said about it. The feedback from, you know, when I had the private screening for the players and their families was tremendous, you know, and I felt very good about it. You know, at the end of the day, this is their story, and I'm thankful for them.
That private screening back in November of 24, the players that were on the team, relatives and so forth, but then also players from your current Revere High team.
Yeah.
What were the reactions from some of the real youngsters in this story, the current players, you know, 17, 18 years old, and there are these players now in their mid to late 70s. There they are on the film. There they are talking. Well, you just do the math. It's easy.
60 years older.
And you know, what was some of the reaction of the young players, the current players?
Well, to use their lingo, you know, it just came up to me like, "Coach, that was tough." And by tough, it's a good thing. You know, it's like, that was great.
Interesting.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
So it's just really good. You know, it was a really good film. You know, they enjoyed it. I had some kids tell me about, like, you know, what he said, that was real. Like, I understood that, you know. Or, you know, you'll have some kids like, I grew up on that street. Really, you know, cool. I grew up on Mountain Ave. I grew up on Mountain Ave. You know, they hear that, they can relate to it. And I think one of the things that they were so captivated of was just looking at the stadium, seeing what it looked like, seeing what the uniforms looked like, seeing what the field looked like before it was the turf facility that it is now. You know, seeing the crowd. They, you know, our captains, like one of the captains, I spoke to him about it, and he was just like, you know, that could be us.
That was
we can do that.
That was,
you know?
one of the most salient points that I got from the film, and I knew I was going to see this. High school football, as we said at the beginning of our discussion, high school football in the 60s was big. And when you think about it, you know, the Patriots, we had the Boston Patriots. They had been around for 3 or 4 years. They started in 1960. No one really cared. There was no, the major NFL team for this region was the New York Giants. Maybe you cared a little bit. You didn't have, you know, because of this being mostly a first generation and second generation community, there were no loyalties to a particular college, you know, an alumni. So the high school football team was the focal point. And I can remember Broadway traffic on a Saturday. You'd think traffic's bad these days. A Saturday back then for the high school football game. And that stadium would be filled every weekend it would be filled.
I don't know if anyone shared this with you or if you remember it, but the stadium, when we had practice on Thursdays, you know, you're getting ready for, you're going through your dress rehearsal on Fridays, so Thursday's your last game.
Yep.
We would share the practice field, which was Paul Revere Stadium, with the Denver Broncos, with the New York Titans.
Oh, because
they
were
would practice there with us.
They would
and that's when Jimmy would put on a show. I'd fly down the sideline and he'd throw a 75-yard bomb, you know. Yeah, and he might have been recognized right there and then. It's like, this kid can throw the ball. But they played on the rock pile like we did.
Right, right.
And to honor my fellow teammates of the year before, that team was awesome. They were awesome.
And this, of course, will be the 1963
team
that had one loss.
And it was a fumble that we should have won. But anyway, that team gave us something to shoot for. And I want to honor them.
Well, the success of those years, up until just recently, up until the 17, 18, and 19 seasons, the success of the 62, 63, 64 teams, or I'm sorry, 63, 64, 65, I think, had the most wins in consecutive years back then, until the 17, 18, 19 Revere teams topped it. And I think they topped it by 2 games. Of course, they're playing a longer schedule now, too. But the point is, the success of Revere High football in the early and mid-'60s, that lasted. That legacy continued. And there were some great years after that. The 1973 Revere team went to the Super Bowl. But that team, that 1960s era, really built a base. Well, I see that we're just about reaching our 1-hour point of discussion. And for those of you who have enjoyed this discussion, we thank Victor, class of 1965, Victor Mancini, number 40 when you watch the film, and the creator of Unbeaten. Thank you so much for the insights and the story, but more so, I think, than anything else, on behalf of all people in the city who lived through it, who experienced it, who remembered it, or who are just learning about it. Thank you for the inspiration to do it and to put it together the way you did.
Can I just thank the both of you guys for, you know, being a part of the process as well. You know, this would not have happened, and it would not have been as great as this is if it wasn't for
It's
your
an
help
honor
and for
to
your
work
help,
with a
man.
young man that's so committed to his craft.
It was a lot of fun, and
It was an honor.
we won't refuse to thank you, but it was more fun for us than it was for you.
God bless you.
God bless you.
Good luck in the future.
Stick around now and enjoy the film Unbeaten. If you haven't seen it, and this is the first time, I think you're in for a treat. And if you've seen it before and you're seeing it again, you're going to notice things in this the second time around or third time around that maybe you didn't see the first time. And of course, there's a link here on the screen where you can watch it pretty much whenever you want on YouTube. But since you're tuned in to Revere TV, enjoy the film. Brandon Brito, the producer of Unbeaten, Victor Mancini, one of the stars of Unbeaten, and my name is Bob Marra. Thank you and good night.